Hello, everyone, and welcome to Textile Talks. I am Carolyn Ducey, the Artist B. James Curator of Collections here at the International Quilt Museum, located at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. The museum proudly stewards and exhibits the world's largest collection of quilts and related textiles spanning 5 centuries and over 65 countries. That's our mission and our passion to build a global collection and audience that celebrates the cultural and artistic significance of quilts. If this is your passion too, and you aren't already a member, we'd love to have you join us. Before we begin, I want to recognize and thank our partner organizations, the Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. We're honored to bring you free and inspiring program with help of our sponsors. We couldn't do it without their generosity and the generosity of viewers like you. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get started today. Please use the Q&A for your questions, which I'll be fielding and hope to get to at the end of our program today. Use the chat box for greeting others and for connection to the survey, which you can take after our program ends. And please give us suggestions for future programs or commentary or suggestions on how we can improve the program. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. The live captions make Textile Talks accessible to a wider audience. However, if you prefer not to view the captions, you should also be able to turn those off. Next week, we have a wonderful program from the Quilt Alliance, Studio Stories Documenting Your Workspace, which sounds really fascinating. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you again to our sponsors and all of you who support this program. Today, we have the Studio Showcase, a conversation with artists Karen Schulz and Judy Kirpich. This is prompted by the fact that an exhibition of Judy and Karen's work is opening this week at the International Quilt Museum. And I hope after our program and the excitement that I know you're going to feel after our discussion, I hope you'll go to our website and check out that exhibition. The Matterport program has not been taped yet, but within the week, you'll be able to actually do a walkthrough of the exhibition through that program. So more to come on that. I'm first going to start out by introducing Karen and Judy. I did not know this when I started planning this exhibition, but Judy and Karen have known each other for a long time, actually both live in the Washington, D.C. area and have been great friends for a long time. Judy began creating her pieces in 2005. Her emotions guide and inform her work and reflect the impact of personal, national, and global events. For the last 8 years, she has worked almost exclusively with the Chinese cotton fabric manufactured with a high gloss. Judy was awarded the Quilt Japan's prize at Quilt National in 2015. Karen was born, raised, and educated in the Northeast and has worked with cloth as her chosen medium for more than 40 years. She uses line, shape, and dye techniques in her effort to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. She is a 2-time winner of Best of Show at Quilt National in both 2019 and 2015. And both artists' work are represented widely in numerous collections, including that of the International Quilt Museum. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We talked a lot about how we would do this textile talk, and of course we want to show your amazing work to our audience. But what I loved is that the two of you came to me and said, we'd like to have a more interesting conversation, not just about our work, but what it means to be an artist and what it means to be an artist over many years and see your work change and progress. So I think today is going to have a very conversational tone. I will be fielding conversation or questions about our conversation, and we'll try to jump in with some of those questions. But in the meantime, Judy and Karen are going to tell me what quilts to show. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to let them really take the discussion on, and I might jump in with some questions here or there. But I think that their experience of what it is to be an artist and to work as an artist is, I think, going to be really fascinating. So let's just jump in. Judy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and then kind of what you would hope to accomplish in our discussion today? And
okay, well,
my screen. So if we want to get started looking at quilts, we can also do that.
Let's start with anxiety 6.
All right, we'll do that.
I really started, I guess, quilting seriously in 2008 when I, like many people, discovered Nancy Crow. And for the first, I'm going to say, I don't know, 10 years of my quilting career, I was known pretty well as a very complicated piecer. I did lots and lots of circles. People couldn't really figure out how I put my stuff together. And you can go to Conflict. Either of the conflicts are fine. And that was great. I always worked in a series. So because I worked in a series, I had a lot of room to kind of play around. So if I look at my first in a series and I look at the ending in a series, they're just really, really different. But I still was looking for something a little bit different. You want to go to Conflict 7? Do you have Conflict 7?
I do.
Good. I've always been known for, I guess, bright colors and complicated imagery. And then all of a sudden in, I guess, about 2016, I was looking for Japanese indigo because I was using it in a couple of pieces. And then all of a sudden I came upon this other fabric, which I didn't know what it was. And I was on eBay and I decided to, take a chance, and I ordered some. And that was a huge turning point for me. Do you want to go to a darker one, like maybe
one of the indigo compositions?
Yeah, let's go to one of the early indigo compositions. So I went from very, very bright colors to working in black. This fabric only comes in 2 colors, black and brown. One side is matte colored, one side is shiny. But I think the part that interests me in this is it meant that I had to really change what I was doing and really kind of navigate what happens when you decide to say bye-bye to all of the work that you've done. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Shall I stop at this point?
Let's let Karen kind of introduce some of her earlier work too, and then let's start talking, and then we'll launch into it with, really what created that need for that change. So Karen, let's take a look at some of your earlier pieces. And
okay, let's start with Beckoning 1. So like Judy, I began a course of study with Nancy Crow in 2007. And I chose to work with her because I had passed by an open door of one of her classes at the Quilt Surface Design Symposium, maybe 3 years earlier than that. And I looked in and I saw huge black and white compositions on the wall. And I knew immediately that that's what I needed and that's what I wanted to do. I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. So it took me 3 years to summon up the courage to do it, but I did start a course of study with her. And as many of you know, when you study with her, you're working with solids and you're piecing exclusively. And I knew I did not have an art background, any kind of formal art background at all. I was always a sewer, but I knew that I needed to learn the lessons of composition. So that's sort of where I began my art career in quilting. And I had a neighbor who he just died recently, who lives behind me, who is an accomplished oil painter. And he and I would sometimes wander into each other's studios. And one day he came in and he said to me, it's really important to know what makes your work yours. So if we can go to Girl in the City with Blue Hair. And that is 35 by 59 inches. And when he said that to me, the first thing that came to mind was my father's handwriting. And that was just the immediate first thought I had. And it was in that moment that I knew that my line work was going to really come to the fore and take priority over other lessons that I had learned about color and shape. And I began to, you can see the lines are now moving off from just sort of outlining the shapes. They're becoming figures in their own right. And then if we can go to And the Skeptic, which measures 81 by 76. I'm still working in solids. I'm still doing exclusively piecing. Now, all of a sudden, something wild is happening here. And I can tell you that when I made this piece, it felt like stepping off a cliff. And I thought, okay, I don't know that I'm ever going to show this to anybody. I loved it. I knew that. But it came out of a 5-hour trip to the Chicago Institute of Art. I walked around there for 5 hours by myself. I took in everything, and I walked out of there and I thought, oh my goodness, what are you so afraid of? You can do anything. It's all art. It's all art. And it really just, it really freed me up. And on the way home, I made 3 very quick sketches on my iPad, and this is one of them. And I translated all 3 of those into quilts. So I'm going to stop there, and we can.
Well, tell me, before we go further,
Yeah.
Karen, tell me, how do you create these lines? They're so expressive, and in this piece, And the Skeptic, it's almost like scribbles. How are you creating that?
Okay, well, I take a picture of the finished pieced quilt before the lines are on there and before it's quilted. I insert it into my iPad and I draw on it. Now, this actually came from an entire sketch that was already on the iPad. But what I have to do then, so the lines on there are drawn very spontaneously, very quickly, and they are drawn with my finger on my iPad. Then, because they're quilts, I have to then very tediously and laboriously, there is nothing spontaneous about it, I can tell you. I am wrestling with that huge quilt. It's 81 by 76. I have to wrestle that through my tabletop machine to couch the lines on top with thicker thread. And so like that the squiggly line on the left-hand side, you can zoom in on that if you want, but those are all zigzagged over on my sewing machine. I have to turn the piece to do each of those directions. I can't just do go like this and have it be like that. I have to turn the entire quilt, which is, truthfully, that is really not fun.
It's a lot of fabric, a lot of textile to be moving. When you said that you weren't even sure if you would show this piece, and that you were asking yourself, like, what were you afraid of? What was that emotional step that you had to take? And I want you both to respond to this, because you made a really drastic change in your style. You're still working improvisationally, so you're both working at your design wall, testing, trying, adding, taking away. But talk more about that emotional journey you were on.
It felt very scary. And I think because at this point I had sort of felt like this is gonna and that maybe not sound too good, but I felt like I was pretty competent at making poetically beautiful images, which I loved and still love. But after that visit to the Chicago Institute of Art, I thought, there's more to me here. There's this sort of unfinished, little messy, interesting part of me that's really not getting exposed, that I now felt brave enough to expose, at least to myself. And I loved the piece, but it felt really, like I don't, and I had made it, and it was finished, but to put it out into the world means now you are now exposing that part of yourself to the world that you hadn't exposed before, and you are not sure that other people are gonna care for that so much.
Right.
I had a similar
Yeah,
experience.
Judy, tell us
So-
about yours.
So I came upon this fabric and I had no idea really what to do with it. It is only made 13 inches wide, but it's fabulous. And I spent 4 years, 4 solid years of experimentation, pretty detailed experimentation. I mean, one of the things that I did is I went to Nancy Crow's masterclass with one box of fabric and instead of 20, because I knew I had to force myself to figure out what this fabric could do. And I was a little bit, I was also scared. On the other hand, I was a little bit cocky because I thought to myself, oh, well, this is fabric that's nobody else actually, I don't think maybe the world is using. And so everything I produce must be fabulous. And for 4 years, I disappeared because truthfully, I didn't get into shows. And the truth was, I had no right getting into shows because the stuff that I was producing, it was great fabric, but the designs were not. So it really took me a while to kind of, I don't know, grapple with the idea of, okay, I have a certain amount of name recognition and now I'm doing something totally new and I'm invisible. And, I didn't, I wanted to keep doing what I was doing, but, everybody has some kind of ego and I probably have one that's even bigger than most. So what do you do when all of a sudden you disappear?
So what did you actually do, physically do, to break free of that and to make work that you were then proud of?
I went through 6 pieces that were, oh God, now I look at them. I mean, I don't show them ever. I had to go through those. Okay, there's no doubt in my mind that I had to produce those 6 pieces. There's no shortcuts to getting to where you want to go. Okay, so and I tried. I mean, one of the things I tried is I tried to take this fabric and say, okay, well, I'm known for doing all these wonderful circles. I'll take this fabric and I'll do circles. You can't do circles with fabric because there's no give. It doesn't stretch, it doesn't move. So I tried, to say, okay, I have a little bit of a, recognition over here. I'll just take the fabric. Nah, didn't work. At a certain point, I realized I needed to go back to the principles of composition, which I did. And, I was finally able to produce some pieces that I really liked and that were good. They weren't, they weren't good because the fabric was good. So,
Right. So what about you, Karen? How did you make that? I mean, other than being inspired by your visit in Chicago, how did you make that big step into something
Well,
very different?
For me, so I knew I really wanted to explore a more expressive line, and I was bumping up against the limits of the way I had been working. So I was frustrated with the solid edges of the piece construction. I was frustrated with how much of an expressive line I could get using just a sewing machine, a rotary cutter. And I knew that I needed to, I knew what I wanted to do, explore an expressive line, but I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. And then a friend of mine said, hey, you know what? You want to take this Jane Davies class called 100 Drawings on Cheap Paper? And I thought, ding, ding, ding. That's where I'm going to get to explore an expressive line. And I did. And so I stepped into this world of mixed media on paper, away from fabric. And I was surprised at how well the lessons of composition translated. Now, I made a lot of dreck, but it was, the materials were cheaper, it was faster, I could play more freely, and And I thought of those two worlds as very distinct at that time. I thought, okay, I got this mixed media stuff on paper over here, and I've got fiber over here. And I was still making quilts because let's face it, I knew how to make large quilts. I wasn't going to make large mixed media work on paper. So I continued, but they were very separate. And then there was another shift where I had made two very small 10-inch by 10-inch collages, mixed media collages, and you can pull up objects in this mirror, which measures 67 by 70. So I thought, okay, I want to see this 10 by 10-inch collage big. And I'm not going to do it on paper. I know how to make a big quilt, but I don't really know how to work with thick and dye and the surface design, the whole surface design thing. So I thought, well, I need to learn some things here. Again, I need to learn something. So I, sought out, I started to work, I worked with Carol Soderlin for a brief time, and then I also started to work with Claire Ben around surface design. And so I picked a composition that I already knew because I was learning new techniques. So I didn't have to invent the whole thing. The composition was done. I just had to figure out, okay, now how am I going to get that onto the fiber?
Well, I'm curious for both of you. We talk so much about finding your voice and knowing your voice, and yet you took a voice that you had that was relatively successful, and then you decided to break out of that. And you said you talked about fear, but did you feel like it was a new voice? I feel like there's a real progression in the work. A lot of your early work shines through, but yet you've taken it to another level. Am I seeing it correctly?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's still me. I can't get. My neighbor who raised the question of it's important to know what makes your work yours. He also once said to me, "It's really important not to paint yourself out of the picture." So it's still you. It's still you. It's still there. The scary part was when you're learning new things and you're going to classes and you meet people and you're all working in the same way, and then you suddenly step away from that, you're leaving your tribe. Not totally, the relationships change, but you're sort of suddenly thinking, oh dear, where is my tribe? Where are my people? Are they surface design people? Well, I don't know. I really don't know that many of them. I mean, so it's still you, but you are exploring this new part of yourself.
How about you, Judy? Was most of your changes prompted by the new fabric that you decided to work with?
I'll tell you what, do you have 13 and then 21?
I do.
Okay, let's show 13. So no, that's not that
Oh,
one.
which one am I looking for?
Do you have indigo composition?
I have number 14, but I don't have 13, Judy.
Okay, that's all right.
And 14.
Okay, let's not show this one. Let's show
Here's 8.
No, that's all right. Go to Iceland number 1. Okay. Look, I feel like I changed my voice many times. The work
This is the first Iceland piece I had. Judy's number 7.
Okay, that's all right. I feel like I changed my voice many times in a way, because what I'm doing now with fabric is just so totally different than what I was doing with, pieced curves and very complicated, hand-dyed cottons. I think one of the changes, I made a huge shift when I went to indigo composition, that series of 21. And within that series, I started off all black, and then I started off all brown. And then what happened is I started to, I started to fool around with color. And after I started fooling around with acrylic paints, I started fooling around with how to take the paint off and distressing it and pleating it and scraping it and printing it. Everything that I said I would never do. I was one of those people who said, I hate paint, I hate mess, and I just kind of had to go dive into it. I think I had a voice change when I started my Iceland series. My kids, my series, they're named Anxiety, they're named Conflict, they're named Memory Loss. And my kids at one point said, Mom, why is everything so depressing? Why can't you do something joyful? And in 2020, my husband and I took a phenomenal, trip to Iceland. And what happened at that point, which I'm thrilled that the museum is showing a lot of the Iceland series because they've never been seen before. What happened is all of a sudden, I'm this abstract improvisational person, and now there's kind of abstract landscape getting in there, which, I thought I would never, ever do landscape. That was not my deal. Well, here I am doing a series of 13 that are motivated from Iceland's landscape. And, it's interesting when I look at the series, it goes from realistic landscape to increasingly abstract. So by the time that I am done Iceland number 6, they're all abstract, and they're, whether they're still about Iceland, but I think this fabric and the need to kind of invent within the fabric, because unlike Karen, there was nobody who was working with this fabric. This fabric, for instance, does not discharge. Okay, it does not dye conventionally. It does all the things that I thought, okay, I could do this. It does not work. So I had to kind of, again, I took a independent study and with some direction from Claire Ben, which was invaluable on how to use acrylics. And I kind of had to move from there onto, the work that I'm doing now.
We had a question, Judy, and I'm curious too about how you bring that color in. And question is, are these pieces quilted first, then painted, or painted first?
They're all painted first. I
So paint the fabric, and then you're doing your piecing.
I'm painting it, I'm distressing it. Sometimes I am pleating it and then painting it because it gives me a different texture. It gives me a rougher texture. Sometimes I'm stitching portions of it, but I have a library of fabric, if you will. And that library of fabric comes from, pieces that I've made. It comes from unsuccessful pieces. For everything you see, there's 2 pieces that are not successful. And I don't throw that fabric out because it's expensive fabric. So I'm constantly recycling and reusing fabric that I made for something 2 or 3 series before. Pieces before.
It is amazing how you can get such subtle gradations. And when you say distressing it, what are you doing to distress that fabric?
I found some fabulous wire circles. Okay, they're wire brushes. They're circle wire brushes that are used to remove paint from automobiles. Okay, like if you're, you have to scrape some paint off. These are fabulous. Now, I don't use them with a drill because it would go right through the fabric, but I do hold these with very strong gloves. And, I will take that wire brush and just scrape off the acrylics. These are all acrylic paints on here. Okay, on this piece, there's acrylics. I also, several of the pieces also have earth pigments, but these are all acrylic on the fabric.
It's fascinating to see the color, and I do love the addition of that. But in essence, how different is this piecing than the piecing you were doing before?
Totally. In my other pieces, when before I found this fabric, I probably didn't have one straight line. And this fabric, the reason it has a lot of straight lines, it has some curves, is that, again, that the quality of the fabric is extremely stiff. So you can do a curve, but it won't look real good.
It doesn't want to curve, does it?
So, you know, the truth is the quality of the line has had to change based on this fabric.
Yeah. And Judy, you would prefer not to share more information about where you acquire your fabric because it's a unusual and hard to find fabric. So there was a question about the name of the fabric. I don't know if there's anything you want to share about it.
Well, I can share how it's made. I'm not going to share how I get it because that's taken me a lot of time to develop. It's made in one village in China. It is basically, they take a 13-inch cotton spool that sometimes they have hand woven it. Sometimes it's, you know, a commercial white fabric. It is dyed indigo. Okay. And after it is dyed indigo, it is dried. And then after the indigo is dry, they dip it in a vat. It changes, but they dip it in a vat of a combination of ox blood, various peppers, different kinds of tamarind seeds. It varies from, you know, person to person. And then after that changes it to a shade of black. After that is done, it is coated, one side is coated with egg. The reason it's coated with egg is it's waterproof. So it's a waterproofing system. This fabric, as far as I know, is only used for clothing. So they need that waterproofing. And I've always been loving, you know, a glossy black next to a matte black. To me, that's like the best thing in the world. So when I saw this fabric, it was kind of a natural for me. There you go.
Well, let's go to another of your Iceland. One of the things that I really love about this fabric is that polished finish on it, and it's harder to see in the grays and the reds, but sometimes in the black that it is such a deep shine, and it almost gets a plastic appearance to it. It's an incredible fabric.
Well, the plastic, the shininess, I do enhance that with the media that I use. So for instance, this is not just acrylic. I am using acrylic and a matte gesso. I'm using acrylic and an ultra high gesso. So I am taking the acrylic and mixing additives to get whatever I want. Okay. The white ones have some of the black, but the white ones also have some of the white is actually, I have painted a really cheap black cotton polyester that I get at Joann's, and I paint it white, and again I distress it, and I paint it in certain ways. So this is a combination of the Chinese and this. I think it's called Trigger for anybody who wants to buy it.
So as you're doing these processes and you're taking yourself in a new direction, how do you know when you've reached that point where you feel like these works are successful? What tells you? Is it just a matter of how you feel about the work, or how do you know?
Karen, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Oh boy.
And let's take a look at another piece, Karen. Which
You know what? Can you ever know? I don't know that you can ever really know the answer to that question, Carolyn. That's just a personal opinion of mine. But you could how about you put up Ghost Ice, which is 41 by 47. I don't think you can ever really know. And there's a really beautiful poem. I wish I could remember who it's by, but I can't. But it's about the writing process. And it starts out with a line that says, or it ends with a line that says, if you have to be sure, don't be an artist. If you have to be sure, don't write. You know, and I think that can be applied to any art. I mean, for me, you know, let's face it. Well, Judy and I both work alone in our studios. We're not working in a community of people actively working in a studio. So, you know, I don't tend to share my work with really anybody until it's pretty much almost done. And at that point, you know, you can't really go back and change it. And I'm not going to. And I know that. It doesn't mean I don't want feedback on the work. I do. I am always really interested in the viewer's interaction with the work. And the further the distance between me and the viewer, you know, not my family, not my friends, the better. You know, I am very curious about what the viewer perceives. And, you know, I mean, how do you know if you're successful, if it's good, I don't know. You got to
It's
put it
more
out
like-
there, and, you know, but for me personally, and that this is just one person's journey, I can't concern myself with that question. It has to please me. That's who it has to please, first and foremost. If it doesn't please me, forget it.
You know, I had the privilege of sitting next to Karen during an independent study. And, you know, it's a little bit amusing because I've got rolls of black paper and, you know, black fabric rather, and she's got rolls of white and she's doing all this silk screening. And it was one of the most fascinating things I've ever witnessed. I kept sitting, looking at Karen. You know, I don't talk, she doesn't talk. We're just observing. And I'm thinking, what the hell is she doing? Where is she going? How is, and not that it wasn't absolutely stellarly beautiful. Okay, let's be very clear. This was not, and I kept thinking, everything is like a surprise. Okay, not that it's really a surprise, but because Karen knows what she's doing. But
yeah, but it is a surprise, and that's a really good point, because for me, like when I stepped into the surface design world and I ended up falling in love with silk screens most recently, that's a most recent love. The thing about the printing is that it is a really great way for me to introduce a level of chance into my work. So if we go back to thinking about the beginning pieces, and you're working on a design wall and you're cutting out very specific shapes and you're putting them up there or trying out shapes, and if it's not right, you take it down and you recut it and then you put it back up there. When you're using a silk screen, the way I use it, I do not know what I am going to get until the very end. And because of the way I'm using the process, I don't necessarily like wash out every step along the way. I need to keep that soda ash in there, and and you know, it reacts differently depending on whether you're doing wet on wet, wet on dry. If you let the dye dry before you go in with your next layer, or you don't, or all of those things, I'm introducing a huge amount of chance, and it's what I love about that process.
Well, we had an interesting question from a viewer who said, what do you do when you get negative critique about your works? How do you respond to a negative response to your work?
Well, I mean, sometimes I go to bed for days. I remember one particular critique. I had worked on this piece and I thought it was great, and you know, and I got this response which was, you know, maybe not so much, and the reason it was so upsetting was because I agreed with it. You know, and that's the thing about feedback. It's like if it resonates with something you already know or you already felt somewhere along the way in the process, then that's a feedback you cannot ignore. And I mean, literally, I just like went to bed and pulled the covers up over my head for a couple days. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just cutting this thing up. It's not very good. They were right. I can see that. And so it suddenly, now you are in a place of complete freedom, because, and it's a great place to be, because you are willing to do things in that moment that you would not do if you didn't not like the piece anymore. You know, it's like, so that's where some of the best ideas come from.
I agree. You have
Way
to
to
be
think
really
about it. How about you, Judy?
You have to be willing to destroy a piece. I mean, I can't tell you. I have one piece that is that I quite like. It's 37 by 37. The only problem is it started out as 107 by 107. And I would go into the studio every single day and I'd say, oh God, what is wrong? And I would tear it apart and put it back together, come back the next, saying, okay, I fixed it. Come in the next day and, I would take more off. And, I'm like Karen, I work in isolation, but there was, every now and then my husband would wander into my studio and he was not a visual person, but he'd say, Judy, you don't have enough white space. And I'm thinking, oh, David, what do you know about this? Okay. I would chase him out of the studio and invariably he was right. Okay. Invariably, I would go back the next morning and say, it needs more white space. How come I didn't understand that? There are going to be people who do not understand my work. I totally get it. Okay. There are going to be people who do not want to put my work up on their walls. I am fine with that. I'm not, you're not going to please everybody. I'm not going to get into every show that I enter. There's no way,
I think when you get feedback from somebody whose work you admire and who you trust, and I've had difficult crits in that kind of a situation, and what do? I come out and I cry.
Well, it's hard to face that.
Yeah.
But it's also amazing that you can embrace it and be honest with yourself and say, is there some value in this critique?
Absolutely. I mean, I think to myself, oh my God, I worked so hard on this. It's taken me years to get to this point. What do you mean I got a lot more to do? Kind of like, what? But the truth is that you do the best you can at the point that you can, and then you gain new knowledge and you broaden your experience, and then you do something different.
You have to have a strong backbone. I mean,
yes.
you just can't be a wuss in this world. And, when it comes to rejection, look, Karen and I have both judged, I guess most of the quilt shows. So something about judging, okay? And what you know about judging is it's political. Not every good piece is going to get in. One judge is going to like one thing. The other judge is going to hate it. There's a lot of horse trading that goes on. I'll give you this piece, but you have to give me that piece. The fact that a piece does not get in my mind, is not a marker if it's good or bad. It's just not. It's what these set of jurors have agreed upon. And also, look, if you have 5 pieces in a row and they all get in and the 6th piece is just as good, by that time, every juror is thinking, oh, I just let 5 pieces in. Maybe I'm not being critical enough. So you can't take a show rejection as judgment on the work that you're doing. Only your heart can do that.
We had a wonderful comment by one of our viewers who quoted a legend about a Chinese painter. And the line that I loved about it is even when it is not enough for others, if it's enough for you, you can live inside it. Right. We learn to cherish our processes and live within our creative journeys. We're
Absolutely.
running out of time so quickly here, and we had a lot of interest actually, and I think this is a really interesting aspect. And I'm going to go through a few more of the images just so everybody sees everything we had. But they were curious about you working and painting your fabrics and why you don't, or have you considered working on canvas? What is it about painting on fabric that is so different than, say, an artist on canvas?
That's a really good question. And I have thought about that. I feel like that's a whole other learning curve. That would be a whole other learning curve for me. I would have to learn about a whole new material. I know that it would alter my process, because when you alter even one thing in your process, it tends to alter everything. So for example, if I were to decide, okay, you know what, I think I want to make large paintings, like, okay, so how big is that one? That is 85 by 55. One could paint that. But I don't know how to do that. And I do know how to make big quilts. So, and I know, because once you change one thing, so many other things change. Like, okay, how are you going to store them if they're canvases? And are you going to pay to have them framed? Because, that's a lot of money for a great big thing like that. And, on and on and on. And where do you exhibit it? And how do you get them seen? And on and on and on.
And I love sewing. I mean, I can't imagine doing pieces where I'm not sewing. I'm in love with my machines, and no, I don't have a long arm, but I love fabric, even difficult fabric. I want this.
So there is something also about the object itself. So, you have the image, and then you have the object. And I have struggled with this a little bit in my work. There is, when I took this particular piece down off the wall after I had finished quilting it, and it's a little, not this piece, but the other one, but it's a little bit softer fabric than I usually use. And when I took that thing down off the design wall and it sort of fell on top of me, canvas doesn't do that. It's a different object.
So it's really more about you embracing a new art added to your textile art. Yep. So not necessarily one or the other. A technical question, Karen, your pieces are not bound. I can see on this photo. Are you wrapping that edge to the back? How are you finishing those?
Yeah, it's faced. They're faced.
Faced. And Judy, how are you finishing your edges?
Also faced.
I
don't use bindings at all.
So no bindings. Judy, this is your latest piece, and I just find this one so intriguing. Somebody had asked if you were going to bring in more of the bright colors that the Icelanders use in their towns. Are you hoping to do more? This seemed very bright to me compared to the other pieces that we'd seen. Is this a direction you're headed now?
Oh, this piece is a hard piece. Okay, this started out as lava. I am a fan of lava. I watch lots of lava videos. And after as I was working on it, I realized this was not lava. This is the way I felt the last year. My husband died. I was upset about the political situation in Gaza, in Ukraine, in our own country. This was a visceral piece about what I was feeling. I love the color of the Iceland villages. I actually tried a few and they were disasters. That's a great example of, I spent 3-4 months doing one of these beautiful, abstract of the lovely, buildings, the colors. Oh boy, how much fabric I used up. You cannot imagine. It will never see the light of day. It's just not right. Yeah. So maybe.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we only have about 5 minutes left or so. And one of the questions that we got that I thought was really interesting, I'm just going to read it. Is it always necessary to machine piece or seam the lines and or curves? Why not hand applique particular different shapes? So is there is that a conscious decision on both your parts to actually focus on piecing rather than say applique or overlaying?
I don't like to applique. And I mean, I used to, when I first started making quilts a long time ago, I hand quilted everything, but I don't like hand quilting. And there is a little bit of hand quilting in that one large Cathedral of the Mind 5. But you know what? I don't like it. And I know it's supposed to be meditative and all that stuff, but when you're trying to hand quilt a really big piece and you're using tightly woven cotton fabric, for me, there is nothing peaceful about it. I mean, again, I'm like fighting with the whole thing, but it's just a different technique and different strokes for different folks. There's nothing that says that there's one is better or worse than the other at all, in my mind.
I am definitely changing my techniques. If you look at the last piece you just showed, there are a number, because I wanted a very raw edge, that there are a number of pieces where I actually have sewn another piece on top of another. It's not pieced. It's not turned under though. I don't applique in a traditional way, but you know, I do sandwich sometimes, especially if I need the edge to be very rough.
Well, we had a couple of other comments, Karen, I thought I would just share with you quickly. If you used a quilting foot, would you not need to turn the large quilt as you go? And there was another comment, the lines and couching are so exciting. Have you ever considered hand couching the lines while on the floor or a very large table? So some people are really concerned about all that work that it takes.
Yeah, you know, at least I don't know of a foot that you can use that you don't have to turn the quilt. But there was one I saw once that I kind of looked at and thought, well, maybe that would work. But at that point, I had sort of decided I was going to move away from that. But no, you can't just do it with a quilting foot. And what was the second question about?
Is I just scrolled away from it, but
sorry.
Let's see. If you were tried doing the couching by hand.
Oh, yes. So very recently I have, and oh my goodness, it's a different line and I do love it. I do love it. So I have done a little bit of that on some smaller pieces because I do actually really love it. And, you know, I mean, that Dorothy Caldwell does that so beautifully and her lines are exquisite. So yes.
Well, we have maybe 2 minutes. Is there like a 1 minute little, so many people are taking wonderful encouragement and inspiration out of what you've shared about just the struggle you've had with new work and changing your work. So can you each give us maybe 1 minute of what you would say to someone who's struggling with their work and really trying to find that voice? Go ahead, Judy.
It's not easy, period. It's just not easy. Even though you may have people who recognize your work and you get a show and you get an award, blah, 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 it is hard all of the time. It is not like you walk in and magically assemble everything. So, you know, I used to tell designers, if you're not feeling scared and frustrated, it's because you are not growing. So I walk into my studio a lot of times scared and just like, oh God. Karen?
Yeah, I mean, you have to love what you're doing, which doesn't mean that it's not easy. It's never easy. It's never easy. I just spent a whole week quilting a piece and ripping it all out, and it was clear monofilament thread that I was ripping out. I'm really glad I did it, and I actually got to love the process. But yeah, you have to love what you're doing, but that doesn't mean that it's easy or that it's fun all the time, because a lot of the time it's not.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up, ladies. Somebody said just thank you so much for sharing your challenges and the way you're embracing those and just sharing that it's not easy. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. I think it's just always that idea that somehow art making is something that just comes unconsciously and you just sit down. But I think that's the point. It's hard work. It's constant experimentation. It's trying things, throwing them out, coming back. And I just think that you both have such strong vision. You asked me why I selected both of you to be in the show. And honestly, I was thinking in my head about lines of work being monumental, but it wasn't monumental. Part of it was scale. I liked that you both were working in large sizes and creating really bold works, but a lot of it was simply that the emotional reaction that I had to your pieces was monumental. They struck me from across the room. Many people have heard me talk about wall power. Well, that was it exactly. I could not walk closer and explore your work. And I was so blown away by that and the emotional connection that I had to your work. And that's why I put your work together, even as different as it is, before I even knew you were friends. So.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for taking a chance on us, because
Yeah, thank you
you
so
took
much.
a chance. You took a chance on two people who were doing new work that nobody had seen, and I think that shows a tremendous amount of bravery and courage on your end. Thank you.
I had no doubts about that. So thank you, though. But thank you. This has been so interesting. And I love a frank discussion about what it's really like to work as an artist. And it is not easy. We had a comment, and I just think that I could answer it. Somebody was just saying, do you make a living off your work? And I just think there are very few artists that truly make a living off their work. So, and that is, we are very lucky, all of us that do creative work, to have the time and ability to do that. But no, that is not something that necessarily pays us back in getting that mortgage or rent payment paid. So we have to wrap up. We are at almost 2. So thank you so much for this fabulous conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us. And don't forget to come back next week for the Quilt Alliance's presentation. And do go to the International Quilt Museum website and see more work there, or make a trip to Lincoln. We're right in the middle of the country. You can get here from anywhere. So come visit us, and you'll really love. The work is phenomenal on screen, but so much better in person. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Are we still on?